Okay, now I want to give you some of the up close, the details of our chicken tractor. Again, it's built on, and it's an 8-foot square, so everything is based off of dimensional, 8-foot dimensional lumber. Shouldn't require cutting, so, well, take that back, it will need a little bit of cutting. So the overlapping boards are 8 feet even. The inside boards are just minus the width, whatever the dimension this is, in order to have this be 8 feet all the way from the outside edge to the other. So these are short by, you know, about 1.25 inches off of this board for this. The corner boards are short. They're not quite 2 feet tall. If you see down here at the bottom, I leave these up so that off the ground, so that the ends of the boards, which are most prone to rot, are not touching the ground. This will all be painted, but for the time being, I didn't want those end grain boards sitting up or sitting right on the ground where they could draw moisture and rot sooner. The whole thing, again, is based off of 8-foot and 2-foot dimensions. So the corners everything is really dimensioned for the hardware cloth. So this is 24-inch hardware cloth, and it goes all the way down from top to bottom, and that's really where your measurement, just to make sure this is 24 inches top to bottom. On the inside, I braced in the middle with an angle brace going up to the middle just for some added stability, and then in the corners added corner braces as well, and so these are just nailed in from the corners, but this gives it a little bit of stability in a few different directions. You could add more boards certainly to give it more stability, so that this thing, as you're moving it around, it's just a little bit more rigid. Obviously the more boards you add, the more weight you add. So tried to go fairly minimal on the boards that we added. It does have a board going across the bottom from one side to the other, and there is a vertical board going up in the middle supporting the horizontal board going across. Originally there were not boards here in the front going top to bottom, but we got some chicks at slightly different ages. We had some that were a couple of weeks older than these birds. I think they are off somewhere. They're over there foraging by the coop, by the large coop. And when they first got in here, some of the young birds were just not smart enough to go over and get cornered by the big birds, and that's a pretty unpleasant sight. So I quickly added a couple more vertical boards, and I threw in a piece of 1/4 inch or 3/8 inch OSB that I had laying around, and I also had some extra hardware cloth that I ran in between these two vertical members temporarily, so that the birds, when they were in here, could see each other but not get to each other. Since then, these birds have gotten a little bit bigger. It's not quite an issue, although at night the older birds are on one side and all of these other birds are on the other. And so I left the I've just left that piece of OSB in the middle, but that'll come out before we paint it. On this side, when you get in over here and look up, I did add some members, sort of joists, just made out of the same 1x3 material running across, because originally I only planned to put roofing on that half of the chicken tractor, and I'll talk about that in just a second. But so there's a few boards that gives it a little bit more stability and holds up the roofing material. Did add a couple of, they sell 1x2s. I think those are even, well, they are even cheaper, and just nailed a couple of those on for the birds to roost on. Mostly they just poop on them, but they do sit up. As you can see, some of the birds will sit up on them. The joists going across actually give you a place to screw in some screw hooks, which is great for hanging the feeders and the water. and which is really helpful to have everything hanging, because when it comes time to move it, you don't have to move anything out of here. You just put the wheels on, lift it up, move it over, everything hangs, and you set it back down, take the wheels back off. The only change that I would make on this is perhaps the system I think Joel Salatin uses. You got to order where you've got a 5-gallon bucket sitting up on the roof of the tractor that you can fill up, and it has a tube that goes down into the water, so you don't even have to get in here except to reach in and add feed. There are also automatic feeders, things to do, but these birds won't be in here that long that I would even need to you know, to worry about that. So originally, if you look up on the top of this, originally on the hinged door side I had hardware cloth, and the idea being that, you know, that if they were in here and we had this thing closed up, there's just more airflow. That is something that in retrospect I wouldn't have spent the money on the hardware cloth on the roof. I would have just closed up, at least for the way we're doing it, which is that we free range the birds all day long. So this is the least expensive roofing material that they have at Lowe's. It's 26-inch by 8-foot sheets of galvanized corrugated roofing. So again, everything is sized for an 8-foot an 8-foot design. I did use the screws that I used to put this down are designed for this purpose, but honestly you could just use regular screws. But these have rubber gaskets under them and a hex head that you can screw them down, drive them down into. So like I said, originally we just had the 2 panels here, and then I had hardware cloth in the roof so that it was more open air. If it did rain, it wasn't a big deal. The birds would be in there closed up. Honestly, once we had them in there, we've had a few good rains, hard rains, and they needed the extra roofing. And so in hindsight, I would just do the entire thing, roof the whole thing over. The one thing about this that I did do, if you've got, is that I just half-lapped these boards for some extra strength, and you can see, and they're glued with Gorilla Glue and screwed together with really short screws to hold them clamped together. And then I built a frame underneath out of the 1x2s to give it stability, make this more rigid, and so that it's not such a floppy thing, and that's set in some distance so that it can close inside of the lower structure. That part's fine. I'll do that again. I just wouldn't do the hardware cloth on it. You don't need plywood or anything underneath this roofing material. It just adds weight, and you don't need it for the purposes for what you're doing with this. The hinges, I just got, I don't know if I can even get to them. There they are. The hinges are just the galvanized, the cheapest. I think they're 3 or 3.5 inch galvanized hinges. There's 3 of them. That's probably one of the trickier things. Just need a couple of people to help you get this in here and screw that down. And then the only other hardware that we added or put on was these handles in the front, which I'll show you in a second. That's how you pick this up and move it. And some latches on the sides. You know, if I guess raccoons or something came at night, they wouldn't be able to lift the lid up. But more importantly, when a good wind comes, storm, these will latch, and you can lock this down so that it stays closed. And then over here, I already showed you how to do the, or I will show you how to do the bolts, the assembly for the wheels. But another set of just inexpensive galvanized handle so that you can lift this up to put the wheels on when you go to move it.